Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Got a bit of a different setup, but you all know what you're here for. The best albums and songs thus far in 2020. But really, does it even make sense to make this list this year? Because I think everybody grasped on a fundamental level how manic 2020 has felt, especially if you've been listening to a lot of music. And as someone who has covered over 175 albums this year in 2020, it's been a lot, but I'd also argue it goes further, as it seems like there's so many artists who've been throwing whatever they can at the wall to see what'll hold and capture a cultural zeitgeist that is rightfully occupied with some other things. I mean, I mentioned this on Twitter a month ago, but in 2020, when I can rattle off that Eminem, Selena Gomez, Tame Impala, Meghan Trainor, Green Day, Grimes, Childish Gambino, Jay Electronica, 5 Seconds of Summer, and Lil Yachty, they all put out albums, and it doesn't seem like anyone cares. Yeah, somebody should be hitting the alarm bells here. Hell, depending on the day, I'd probably throw the 1975's latest effort into that category too. But here's what's really funny. I still found a ton of great music this year thus far. I've already talked about how country's having a deceptively strong year, especially outside the mainstream, but underground hip-hop managed to ramp things up nicely in the past couple of months. But what's really surprised me is how good pop music has been, both in its own lane and in crossover with other genres like rock and punk and country. Hell, even if I didn't love some of the releases in their entirety, there are absolutely some big pop singles that I will praise to high heaven. Some even successful in the mainstream. And what I personally found funny is that there are explicit echoes to my 2017 Midyear list in some of these albums, especially from a trio of acts who have been consistently amazing, and they were in 2020 as well. But I guarantee there's going to be surprises here among the 15 albums. Yeah, we're beefing up this list. So let's get started with number 15. This one has always been a slow burn, but if there was a year to really sit with albums that are layered and contemplative, all about setting the vibe, it's this one. And spoilers, that's reflected more on this list ahead. But I also always had the suspicion when I covered this that it would hit a little better when we got warmer, we were able to lean into all that. But oh yeah, it did.
Face down, ass up, face down, ass up, do the ground, chicken head, busted you, hit the chick, cabbage back.
I said in my review that the first Innocent Country was an entry in Quelle Chris's discography I didn't quite love in comparison with the projects around it. Well, it seemed like he was looking to correct that impression in a very big way, tying off the loose thematic ends on the first project with a pretty inspired framing device before opening up his scope much bigger off the organic jazziness of Chris Keys' production. No, it's not as kooky or immediate as Guns was, but a Quelle Chris more secure in himself can find and elevate black excellence while deepening his introspection at every turn, where a voice that might seem out of place can look outside of himself and then still elevate a movement. There's populism in that, and even beyond what it can lend the movement, the languid pace, the excellent guest verses, leads to a really great project. Yeah, definitely a country that's worth surveying. Take the time, check this out. Number 14. I haven't made it a secret that I've had some frustrations with the black metal I've been hearing in 2020. Actually, let's just say metal as a whole, it's been a pretty rough year. But it doesn't mean I wasn't able to find a howling, massively propulsive gem, and here it is. This is a case of a project that finally got the formula right. The melodies were textured and striking, the grooves were rich, the vocal contrast between the screams and the clean singing was remarkably well balanced. The content was rooted in the visceral, primal beauty of nature, with a very Native American bent that gave them some real uniqueness in the scene. It was just a matter of getting the grooves, specifically the drums right, and on Thunder in the Mountains, they finally did on their best album to date. It's the sort of project that feels like a long overdue culmination of all their ideas, and even then, it's a little bit surprising how easy this goes down. A little bit deceptive on how well this will stick in your brain, even when you're not entirely thinking about it. But thus far, it's been my favorite folk-tinged atmospheric black metal in 2020, and I'm thrilled they finally got the formula working. You haven't heard it? Check it out. Something special. Number 13. This is a project I've been praising since the very beginning of the year, and even then I feel like it's been ignored because their major label has no idea how to market them effectively, somehow choosing some of the worst possible singles. But even still, I'm comfortable putting this among their best.
And I want you to hold me and take me into your arms, safe from the storm.
A lot of people compare Little Big Town to Fleetwood Mac, mostly because mixed gender bands with great vocal harmonies, but to me the most stark comparison comes in a lot of the remarkable maturity of the content, and how they don't shy away from some complexities in relationships. Another pretty expansive project on this list, but backloaded with some of their best songs this decade. The deep cuts are what stands out, and there's this warm, contemplative feel to this project that will really get under your skin in some really well-constructed stories, building off a lot of the foundation they've been haltingly building the past decade. Again, this is a group where a lot of their 2000s run is pretty entrenched among the best mainstream country that came out in that sort of decade, but in 2020, they delivered a work that can compete with all of it, and it's been ignored by way too many this year. And a year thus far that's got a ton of strong country, and again, we're gonna get to more of that. You don't want to be sleeping on this. But before we move on, I normally include a bunch of songs from albums that miss this list but still deserve a lot of attention all the same. And as I'm covering more albums this year, I'm going to split these segments up a little bit more throughout this list. So, from the mistakes I've made, Right Side of Goodbye by Greg Williams.
That's why I'm leaving you on the right side of goodbye.
From High Road and featuring Sturgill Simpson, Resentment by Kesha. From R.I.P. Killer B-Side Music by We Are the City. From Miss Anthropocene, Delete Forever by Grimes. From Sorry for the Late Reply, Telepathetic by Slotface. And from California, Kiss Me by Rebecca Connolly.
Kiss me like I'm yours instead.
And now let's get back to the list. Number 12. I can predict there's going to be two controversial choices for this list, and this is the first big one, more because of how the artist has been unfairly branded rather than the quality of a lot of her music, which I've been a staunch advocate for years now, and that there's a lot more going on than she's really been given credit. So, in case you missed it the first time, here's my case.
I've been missing you for 10,000 hours. I cannot let go. 10,000 memories.
I've said this before, but right now modern R&B, especially near the mainstream, basically owes a lot of its sound to Jhene Aiko. But more than just the sensual vocals and the sprawling organic production and the purposeful guest features and the ability to sound sexy with an ease that so many of her peers can't match, what I've always liked about her and what I want to highlight is the writing. There's an emotive subtlety and complexity to the arc of all of Jhene's albums that on the surface highlights your usual relationship messiness, so you might think this album, this Love Struck, might feel out of place in her catalog, except read between the lines, and you realize how much of this builds off the trust she had to rebuild on Sold Out, and the very real grief that the loss of family that she was self-medicating to escape on Trip. Even here, on an album where she has to know herself better than anyone else, there's this really tired, wistful sadness at a collapse that she might see coming that makes its meditative second half really resonate. And in a year where I needed to immerse myself in a lot of inward contemplation, Jhene delivered the best possible example at precisely the right time. Number 11. Yeah, I was late to the party with this debut, but queer dream country that can stick the landing this well, this early, deserves a lot of attention.
But the morning came and stole right out of the blue.
What I find so striking about Katie Pruitt's debut is how assured she is with a lot of her sound. There's rough edges in her delivery, that'll be tempered with time, but here she uses it in the adolescent struggles with sexuality that show a wisdom and weight beyond her years, but also a textural fit for a lot of the stories she's telling. She cited Brandi Carlile as an influence, which is kind of obvious in the album's pacing and the organic warmth and the great eye for detail, but the very Catholic framing and some of the arranged elements and a lot of the homespun pop touches, they are hers alone. And I love that this album doesn't just center the conflict and the scars, but also delivers the big heartfelt ballads that can tell the next step of her story. Well, whatever is the case, Katie Pruitt made her name in a big way with this, blowing right past any expectations I might have had. Yeah, I'm sold. I can't wait to hear more. Number 10. I'm a little bit shocked this project stuck with me as long as it did. Many people have described it as a lateral move at best for this pop country artist, where she's embracing cliches of indie pop that have been overexposed years ago. But how does she make it work so damn well regardless?
Damn you for breaking my heart. Damn you for breaking my heart.
I'm a little bit convinced that Caitlyn Smith is dragging Supernova to quality on sheer performances alone. A huge dynamic voice that, yes, could probably really use some of the more old school lush production or the more robust storytelling of Starfire, but she's just gonna go bigger to compensate regardless, helped along by some of her best ever songs that had enough hooks to really stick with me despite all the odds stacked against it. Yes, it is a project with less dimensionality in everything but her performance, but again, when the hooks stack up and you get cuts like Damn You for Breaking My Heart, Midnight in New York City, and especially Lonely Together, which might as well be Cheap Date Part 2, but might also be better for it, yeah, you get precisely the right moments to really smolder with some real intensity. And Caitlyn Smith assures that this Supernova, it's not gonna burn out too quickly. It's another pop-leaning country project that I'd argue has been overlooked by a lot of people. Yeah. Fix that. But before we move on, a few more songs that might be worth mentioning here. From You or Someone You Know, End of the World by Worriers.
Cover your eyes and ears and hope I don't notice nothing hurts.
From After Hours, Blinding Lights by The Weeknd.
No, I can't sleep until I feel your touch.
From Ladylike, The Stranger by Ingrid Andress.
Girl at the bar, the same place where this all got started.
From Future Nostalgia, Love Again by Dua Lipa.
You got me in love again. You got me in love again.
From Wake Up Sunshine, Melancholy Kaleidoscope by All Time Low.
Get the picture in your head right. Melancholy kaleidoscope, it's alright.
And from It Is What It Is, Dragon Ball Durag by Thundercat.
Baby girl, how do I look in my do-rag? Would you do me the do?
Alright, so let's keep moving on a little bit with number 9. I already know there are some folks who are following this who are starting to get a little bit exasperated with all the country choices I'm making here, even though I have been saying this has been an exceedingly strong year for that genre. And hell, we've got albums by Laurie McKenna and Rustin Kelly coming later this year, my god. But you know what? This was an act I'm actually a little bit late to talking about on my channel. I mean, come on, it's their best project since Burn, Flicker, Die. How am I not gonna praise it?
They say sing your song, boy, shut your mouth. But I believe in a better South.
This is one of 2 political indie country releases on this list, and yet what it can lack in some nuance and slightly inconsistent production, it makes up for in a big way by hitting the precise balance between confessional storytelling and some anthemic power. And you need that balance, especially considering BJ Barham's difficult reputation, it's now preceding him and his band, and him taking more accountability is a really big step in the right direction. And when matched with hard conversations about sobriety, relationships that he ruined, and a dogged desire to fight for better, both for himself and the South at large. And again, it's very easy to compare this to some of American Aquarium's best, and I would not really put it there, but this is a project that has only deepened its appeal with every passing month, and I'd argue A Better South might be among some of the best songs of 2020. It's that good. So yeah, if you've fallen off with American Aquarium at some point this decade, it wouldn't be hard to do so. Believe me, I get it. You should check this out anyway. Get back on board. Number 8. And speaking of albums that have a lot of unfortunate comparison points, yes, it's only grown on me this year, it has stuck around, and while I won't quite give it the effusive praise that nearly every other critic has provided, Fiona Apple's intensity can rarely be denied.
Kick me under the table all you want. I won't shut up. I won't shut up. Kick me under the table all you want. I won't shut up. I won't shut up.
At this point, you don't need me to add to any more conversation about Fetch the Bolt Cutters. The discourse that week, it was wild. The album has proven staying power thus far, and while for me, her 90s work will always stick with me the most, Fiona Apple's emotive storm, constantly on the cusp of really exploding, and its fiercely detailed and feminist storytelling, yeah, something to behold here. Yeah, it's shaggy and weirdly sequenced in spots, and I don't think it's got a great ending. But there's an idiosyncratic charm and potency where the outward questions of refinement kind of disguise how clever and really devastating this album can be. And while I will continue to make a lot of the comparisons to Nico Case's similar wild album from 2 years ago, Hell On, where there are way more parallels than I think many people are giving credit, Fetch the Bolt Cutters still nails its tension off the frenetic percussion and a master's command of instability. Great, really complex album. Absolutely worth hearing if you haven't already, and really, just with all the critical acclaim, check it out. Number 7. So remember when I said there was 2 controversial entries on this list? What I didn't mention was how, by its position alone, I can imagine some folks getting really agitated. Especially when I could just leave it off, nobody would be the wiser. But is that fun?
You left me with nothing, not like any other stranger. Why do I think of you? You left me with nothing.
I remember back in 2017, I got on board the train for Niall Horan. He wasn't the flashy powerhouse his former bandmate Harry Styles was, but he was a really sharp songwriter with good instincts, and that made Flicker a surprisingly good, underrated album. Well, Heartbreak Weather is an improvement across the board, with hooks that come out for days, writing that consistently punches above its weight class, and that's arguably where I will give it the most credit, and compositions where the parallels to existing acts might be obvious until you realize that for as much as Niall Horan can imitate the 1975 or Ed Sheeran, he's gonna make some of these pastiches even better. Hell, I can argue Niall made better 1975 songs than the 1975 did this year. And he also did it with an old-fashioned pop star swagger with writing that actually fits the modern era. And what I admire is how much of a streamlined layperson technician he is on a compositional level. Similar to someone like, I don't know, Carly Rae Jepsen. I've said this so many times before, it's harder to write a lasting mainstream pop song than many will give credit, and Niall Horan leaning into that to make what might be the most underrated pop album of 2020. You know, folks, I think he's gonna stick around. I'll keep an eye out. Okay, we're over halfway through, so let's rattle through a few more songs, starting with From the Way It Feels, Drunk or Lonely by Maddie and Tay.
I know you're just drunk alone, lonely.
From Nothing Is True and Everything Is Possible, Satellites by Enter Shikari.
But I can't show you in love.
From Sawayama, Chosen Family by Rina Sawayama.
To share dreams or a surname, you are my chosen family.
From The K Is Silent, Then It Rained by Hot Country Nights.
It stopped for a little while, and then it rained.
From it was good until it wasn't, and featuring Jhene Aiko, Change Your Life by Quelle.
Oh, baby, let me change your life. You ought to be anything.
And from dedicated side B and featuring Bleachers, Comeback by Carly Rae Jepsen.
Reason I was on my knees, but I'm thinking about making a comeback. Back to me.
Alright, now back to the list here. Number 6. You know, damn near every time I cover this artist, when I get around to making my list, I always find myself a little bit surprised that he's still here, and I'm wondering if maybe I'm giving him way too much credit. So, yeah, I go back, I do the right thing, I put the album on, I listen to it again, and then I get it all over again.
I'm on the lookout for anything that moves Crimson Tide.
Yeah, somehow Dan Behar did this, a more accessible album than Ken, while building off the chilly textures and haunted obliqueness that gave that project its subtle power, where the haunted foreknowledge of what was coming, well, it's now moved up to the present, and it feels horrifyingly prescient in a lot of the political subtext, especially in dismantling all that distance he was trying to manufacture. That's the real creeping power of Have We Met, and why it sticks around so much. On the surface, it seems as moody and distant as ever, but the more its analog synths, the thicker grooves, and Dan Behar second-guessing his own words as they tumble forth with greater urgency, the easier it is to be drawn into that strange connection he's trying to build. This is music made for the artist who can't hide anymore, building all that mystique in order to break it. And in 2020, yeah, stunning amount of staying power for me. It's a tricky album to love, it's not for everyone, but it should be for a lot more people. And it's been ignored. Check it out. Number 5. Of all the projects on this list, this is the one I'm most on the fence about my opinion. Most because this is a guy who has cranked out some of the best alternative country singer-songwriter projects of the past decade, and when placed in context, a lot of that same quality is there, but hell, it feels more fragile than ever. I mean, it's still goddamn amazing, but we're gonna have to talk about this.
It's easier, but it never gets easy. I can say it's all worth it, but you won't believe me.
So let me get this out of the way now. It's not better than the Nashville sound, nor something more than free. And if Jason Isbell was looking to conceal how troubled this production was, you did not pull that off. Especially as this is an album that seems all the more tense and precarious with every single listen. Not just in its politics that challenge the very ethical roots of conservatism. Yeah, this is the second big political country project on this list, albeit a little less so than advertised. But it's also in a family structure straining at hard times in the face of a man who still can't shake his demons. It gets easier, but it never gets easy. And that combined with Dave Cobb's production that's naturally a little colder and some compositions owing more to progressive rock, it makes Reunions an album that's considerably harder to like. But you know what? Jason Isbell's such a great poet, and leaning into the fear and the tension and facing all those insecurities head on. Be afraid, be very afraid, but let it go anyway. Do it anyway. You wind up gripped regardless. And for as rocky as it is, still potent as all hell, deserves all that attention. Number 4. Oh, you thought we were done being political? In 2020? And when it bangs this hard?
Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar. Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar. Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar. Look at all these slave masters.
No, it's not Run the Jewels' best, and I'm still worried this is gonna fade a little when some of the energy of everything around right now starts to fade away. But at the same time, it's terrifying how prescient an apocalyptic project like this feels, until you realize it's speaking on systemic issues that aren't going away, and it didn't require all that much foresight. It's Killer Mike and LP at their darkest as they stare into the immense reality that gangster bravado and bars upon bars upon bars can only challenge for so long, but you can't be the kamikaze pilot to take it down in one fell swoop. You gotta keep living in it. And that's where I feel, and I get the feeling that this is gonna wind up holding up beyond this moment. And I'm not sure whether or not that's unfortunate. And you know what, at this point, you know what Run the Jewels brings. All the guests deliver. You can unearth more wit and punchlines with every single listen. It got replay value. And right now, I challenge you to find better rap music in 2020. Go on. I'll wait. But before our top 3, just a couple more songs from albums that missed the list but are worth hearing all the same. From Alfredo and featuring Tyler the Creator, Something to Rap About by Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist.
Lobster lollipops and crustaceans, so what you mad about? I fucked her twice in Vegas, that pussy one shit to brag about.
From Golden Hour and featuring Zach Brown, Someday by Kaida.
I belong and I don't know how, don't know when. Someday I'm gonna see you again.
From How Much Works, Patterns of Nature by Sweet World.
The patterns of nature got nothing on me.
From God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It, and featuring Ada Rook, Black Magic by
I love the bad magic, yeah. Fuck with the mathematics, yeah. Fuck with the mathematics, yeah.
From Drug Dealing is a Lost Art, Rascal by Rumor.
This game, this much I know it's true.
And finally, from Love, Death, and Dancing, Better by Jack Garrett.
Everything else will work itself out. Everything else will work itself out.
Alright, we're down to the end here. Number 3. I'll freely admit I'm a little bit surprised this album is as high as it is on this list, because after the first couple of listens, I wasn't really sure I could say this matches his album from the last time I talked about him back in 2017. But the trick I've realized with Perfume Genius is that a lot of my lasting fondness is often inextricably linked to how much I will go back to it, and by far, this has been the one I've touched the most.
On the floor, I pace, I run my mouth, I pray and wait. I cross out his name on the page. This washes away.
What I think caught me off guard about this project is that it seemed like it didn't quite have that same emotional intensity as Too Bright or No Shape previously did. But then I realized that's not only not quite true, but more because Mike Hadrius was translating it into his most eclectic and diverse set of Baroque pop songs he has ever made, maintaining a lot of that thrumming, slightly unstable groove beneath some gorgeous arrangements, and some of his most joyous and love-struck writing to date. Yeah, it pivots into some darker notes at a few points, kinda has to, but there is a comfort found in companionship that feels like a real progression for Mike Hadrius. And as someone who has been listening to him for years now, almost a decade, to hear a lot of that growth and that happiness fully realized, and like with Katie Pruitt recognizing what that can mean in a queer relationship, it's a thrill I didn't know I needed. It's like watching a friend beat back a long-standing influence and move on with his life, fall in love. And even if there might be cracks, they're gonna make it work, and that's what makes it so special. More than ever, it just opens up so many doors for him going forward, and you know what, I just know the best is yet to come. So you'll want to get on board now. Number 2. You know, throughout the past couple months of quarantine, the message I've heard is that a lot of people are not hunting for new music. They're going back to the familiar, what goes down easy, what makes them happy right out of the gate. And at the end of the day, yeah, I can recognize some of that impulse in myself. I get why you're returning to familiarity, to the point where, even though I don't have a ton to say, I know exactly why this album is as high as it is on my list.
Swearing like the captain of the riverboat queens, hauling all your money down to New Orleans. She got it, heartbreakers smile.
Yes, I am late to the Gabe Lee party, but I'm really thrilled I'm here, because this is the sort of sunny, colorful, brilliantly sharp country music that's so easy to love. There's so much warmth and charm and texture in Lee's nasal and expressive delivery that you almost don't recognize how damn sharp and sticky the hooks are, or how much cleverness he'll pack into songs that are overflowing with real swagger, but also a lot of emotional intelligence and real wisdom. I'm reminded a lot of Kyle Kraft in the eye for detail and some parallels in vocal timbre, but Gabe Lee is way more country, a little less concerned with a lot of the showy artifice, which helps the emotive punch when he strips everything back for something a lot more humble, like the absolutely stunning 30 Seconds at a Time. And again, with so much natural charisma to back it all up, Gabe Lee takes a lot of the formula he laid down on Farmland 2 years ago, which is also a great album, I probably should have covered it, and then he expands it considerably. And I'll admit this was a project for which I didn't give a full review, but hell, when it's this straightforward and direct in its raw appeal, cuts past the need. There's not a lot I need to say. Too many of y'all have slept on this, folks. You're gonna want to hear it and get on that road. It's great. And finally, number 1. Now on the flip side, you can default to the easygoing stuff, but sometimes the best way to find real catharsis is to rip your heart out and dig into the core with aplomb. And in 2020, there's a part of me that didn't want this to keep feeling as relevant as it does, but sometimes you need it, even in the most unlikely of places.
Say keep your head up if you're not okay. But not okay is what's expected. Claim you're a hero if you can make it off the couch. You know the truth in what they say. The world's gonna kick you either way.
So it should be no surprise this is topping my list. What actually surprises me is how many other people have actually got on board with Spanish love songs, including fellow critics in the know. And I honestly thought I was going on a ledge when I gave this album a perfect score, but then to not just hear that opinion echoed, but for the album to only pick up more visceral, emotive punch with every passing month, it's awe-inspiring. I have not heard an emo project this consistently strong across the board in years. Most because this project takes all the grown subtext of the Midwestern emo scene and then drills into the real desperate reality in which too many people live, and then will give you a weathered hand to keep on going, keep on fighting. And I already know there might be folks who will hear the total lack of irony and deflection and dismiss all that, but the band has already heard that deflection too. It wants to go past it, grab the humanity buried beneath it, make you feel something, and then coupled with fantastic and consistent production, pummeling and groove-rich hooks that just will not stop, and an attention to some visceral detail that leaves every single song quotable and still feeling frighteningly real. Yeah, likely gonna be my album of 2020. And even though there are some real challengers coming, this is a real colossus to beat. Brave faces, everyone. After the first half of this year, 2020, and what could be coming, we might just need it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I get a lot on this list, and this probably will have some differences with what you guys have. I haven't covered everything this year, even though covering over 170 albums is a lot. But hey, leave your list down in the comments below. I'd be happy to take a look. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. I'm still trying to work with a new camera angle. We'll see how much I'll be going with that in the future. Leave your comments if you think it works. Beyond that, hey, if you guys actually want to help get albums on my schedule, stuff that I might need to hear, yeah, link to my Patreon is right over there where you can help contribute to my schedule. I understand hard times for a lot of people, do not feel obligated in any way, but if you want to, there's the opportunity. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.